You don't
Mm.
feel like you have a broken arm, but you still do. You still have a problem. You're just not aware of it, right?
Yeah.
Think of caffeine and fatigue. The fatigue is the broken arm. Caffeine is the morphine. You can still be in a huge energy deficit, sleep deprived, feeling crap, not in a position to train, and you can load up on loads of caffeine and then feel fine. But that subjective feeling of fineness does not accurately reflect where you're at physiologically. So people mistake that for, I have loads of energy. What's actually happening is you're just taking high dose stimulants so you feel better than you actually are. That's probably what prime energy does. From a bioenergetics perspective, looking at, say, the actual calorie and carb content, it's not at the races. If it doesn't have that much carbs or sugar in it, it's probably not worth using. I'm pretty sure I've also heard other people kind of slated saying it had like strange levels of electrolytes and just unnecessary ones inside it as well. Athletes really only need to worry about sodium. If you're worrying about potassium chloride or magnesium or anything like that around exercise, it's just a waste of time. You don't actually lose appreciable levels of that in any level of exercise, so it's not a consideration to make. Prime is just fancy marketing and celebrity profiteering off of generally poor levels of information and a trust in people we follow on Instagram.
You mentioned the Irish diet and having high levels of salt. And I would be one of those people that interchangeably do salt and sodium, even though they're different things you talk about. But salt tabs for endurance races, like for example, obviously the Dublin Marathon, if we're getting enough salt in our system, are salt tabs a waste of time, or because you're using losing a lot of sweat during the marathon that you should have one journal? Would you recommend endurance? Someone listening to this doing a marathon, would you recommend them having a salt tab, or is it you have to, like you talked about sweat tests and stuff before, which I'd never actually heard of that you should or shouldn't do?
So
Loaded question there.
there's a couple of aspects to this. Um, how will I start? So think of yourself as a big glass of my wadi, right? You want it just right in terms of concentration. When we look at sodium and salt, people tend to focus on how much am I losing in my sweat, which is a bit of a red herring. We more so care about the salt or sodium content in our bloodstream because that's what's more physiologically relevant. Your body will work really hard to keep your sodium levels nice and steady in your bloodstream. As you sweat, fluid or water is taken out of your blood. That's where it comes from. All of the stuff in between your arteries and your veins, about 15 liters of stuff there, if I'm not mistaken, for the average person. As you sweat, the stuff in your blood gets more concentrated. So if I got an athlete to sweat for an hour or two and I blood tested them, which I will never do because I'm afraid of needles and blood, but if I did, um, true. If I did, what I would see is their sodium levels would rise massively as they get more and more dehydrated. So the misdirection here is make panic that the athlete has high levels of sodium in their sweat. Replace that. Ignore the fact that their blood sodium levels are rising all the time. And then what happens if we add salts to that? We're just challenging our body's own homeostatic mechanisms. It doesn't make any sense. So they've actually done modeling studies on this, and it's counterproductive, or not counterproductive, counterintuitive. If you're a high sweater and an average drinker, you're going to get more and more dehydrated as you progress through a bout of exercise. If you're not able to replace 70% of your fluid losses for events up to 10 hours, all you need is an isotonic, like a Lucozade Sport, to keep your blood sodium levels steady. That's all. You do not need high dose electrolytes. The caveat is if you're a low sweater and you're able to drink all of that, not only are you losing salt in your sweat, but then you're diluting the diminishing sodium levels in your bloodstream. So you're making a very weak glass of my wadi out of yourself, so to speak. So the low sweaters and high drinkers are the people who need the big salt taps. Nobody else. Does that make sense?